Discourtesy to the Mughal emperor. The Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar had in those days a name or a title only. In fact, he was not at all powerful. But even that was devalued when Lord Dalhousie announced that on the death of the king, his successors would have to leave the imperial palace, that is the Red Fort. Later in 1856, Lord Canning made it known that Bahadur Shah's successors would not be allowed to use the imperial title, that is the title of the king. Such a discourtesy to the Mughal emperor hurt people's sentiments considerably. Treatment meted out to Nana Sahib. Dalhousie's refusal of pension to Nana Sahib, the adopted son of ex-Peshwa Bajirao II, was very much resented by the Hindus in general and Nana Sahib in particular. It is said that Nana Sahib had inherited the enormous wealth from ex-Peshwa. He spent that money in sending messengers to different parts of the country and instigating revolt everywhere. Unpopular administration or administrative failures, there were several reasons which made British administration highly unpopular. First, people found themselves out of place with the English laws and the English language. The British officials had no knowledge of the manners, customs, and habits of the people. Second, Indians were being excluded from all high offices in the army as well as administration. Third, the British officials had great contempt for the Indians. Their arrogance led them to consider the natives of India as undeserving in the name of human beings. The vague and floating rumors. There were rumors that the days of the company's rule in India were numbered. People believed that British came to power in 1757 after the Battle of Plassey and their rule would come to an end in 1857. Then there were some religious and social causes. So social and religious factors were also at work in causing uneasiness among the people. Fear regarding mass conversion to Christianity. The activities of the Christian missionaries created a sense of alarm among both the Hindus and the Muslims. The teachings of the Christian doctrines was made compulsory in schools set up by the Christian missionaries. The Bible was introduced not only in Christian institutions but also in government schools. Even prisoners in the jail or prison house began to be instructed in Christianity. The officials openly preached Christian doctrines in mosques and temples. The Missionary Society of America established a press at Agra. It published leaflets and little books full of inaccurate information about Hinduism. In brief, a feeling of panic was rising in the people who believed that they would all be converted to Christianity. Laws that interfered with the religion and customs of the people. Religious Disabilities Act of 1850 changed the Hindu law of property. It enabled the convert from Hinduism to inherit the property of his father. The Hindus regarded it as an incentive to giving up one's religious faith. Taxes were imposed on the properties of temples and mosques which earlier had been tax-free. In the 19th century, the British took measures to control some of the social evils. The Widow Remarriage Act, passed in 1856, was a progressive measure. Earlier, sati and female infanticide had been prohibited. In fact, reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Keshav Chandra Sen themselves attacked sati and female infanticide. Yet people did not react favorably to these measures favoring social reform. They raised the cry that their religion was in danger. Introduction of the railways and telegraphs. The railways and telegraphs were looked down upon as means to break social order and caste rules. In the railway compartments, people of all castes had to sit together. It was a progressive change, but the mass of people regarded it as an interference with the caste rules. There was also a rumor that the telegraph poles would be used for hanging people who were against company's rule in India. Racial discrimination and indignities hurled at Indians. The Englishmen in India could insult, humiliate, and even kill the Indians at will. An English magistrate at Agra had issued the following notification: every native, whatever his pretended rank may be, ought to be compelled to salam or salute all Englishmen in the street. Besides, if an Indian was on horseback, he had to dismount and stand in a respectful manner until the European had passed him. Such indignities alienated the British from the Indian masses. Fears regarding English education. Christian missionaries had established a number of schools in British India. Gradually, the number of government schools also began to grow. In 1829, the Bengal government established an English class in Kolkata Madrasa School, which was a Muslim institution. Later, English classes were introduced in Banaras Sanskrit College also. This seemed to have been done on the face of it by best of intentions, but shifting of emphasis from Oriental learning to Western education was not well received by the people, especially the priestly class. They saw in it an attempt to discourage Islamic and Hindu studies. This was also the fear that the object was not so much the promotion of literature and sciences as inducing the people to become Christians. Then economic causes, India's exploitation. A natural consequence of the British rule was the economic exploitation of the country. The ruins of trade and handicraft, the popularity of Indian textiles alarmed the policymakers in England. An act was passed in 1720 which prohibited the use of Indian silks and calicoes in England. The British rulers deliberately crippled Indian arts and crafts. Heavy duties on Indian silk and cotton textiles in Britain, 70 and 80% respectively, destroyed those industries. On the other hand, British goods were imported into India at a nominal duty. By the middle of the 19th century, export of cotton and silk goods from India practically ceased. The art of spinning and weaving, which for ages had given employment to thousands of artisans, became extinct. Manufacturing towns of Dhaka, Murshidabad, and Surat now looked helpless and desolated. Poverty-stricken cultivators. The zamindars or landowners had so far been only revenue collectors. They could keep a certain percentage of what they received from the peasantry, but the permanent settlement of 1793 made zamindars the absolute owners of their estates. They had the power to eject the cultivators for non-payment of the dues. The permanent settlement remained restricted to Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. The Mahalwari system was prevalent in parts of central India, the Gangatic Plains, and Punjab. In Bombay, Mumbai Presidency, and parts of southern India, the peasants continued to pay revenue to the government, but the British revenue officers were strict in revenue collection. Almost half of the net produce was claimed as land revenue. Unable to pay land revenue, the farmers were driven more and more to borrow from the moneylenders. India reduced to an agricultural colony of the British. Bihar, Bengal, and Awadh emerged as major producers of export crops such as jute, opium, and indigo. British companies managed this export trade. The manufacturers in England required other raw materials also, such as cotton and oilseeds, for their industries. After the Industrial Revolution, the British did all that they could to keep India mainly an agricultural country. This made India an agricultural colony of British capitalism. Inhuman treatment meted out to the indigo cultivators. In 1833, the Englishmen were permitted to acquire land and settle as planters in India. The peasants were forced to cultivate indigo and nothing else in the fields chosen by the British planters. Their crops were wantonly destroyed by the planters, their houses were burnt, and their cattle carried off as plunder. Annexation of rent-free land and estates. In 1852, an Inam Commission was appointed to inquire into the title deeds of the owners of large estates. Many landowners pleaded that they could not produce their title deeds on account of the passage of time. The government did not accept the plea and confiscated some 20,000 estates. This resulted in a lot of discontentment among the people. The land gentry talukdars of Awadh faced serious hardship after the annexation of Awadh. Most of them were deprived of their estates. Proud aristocracies, says R.C. Majumdar, were reduced to beggary and servitude. Then loss of livelihood. Millions of artisans and craftsmen who lost their job had no alternative source of income. Introduction of Western education meant that the Pandits and Maulavis imparting Oriental education would also become jobless in days to come. Annexation of Indian states meant loss of livelihood for thousands of the native troops. During the War of 1857, the sepoys of Awadh brought havoc and added greatly to the difficulties of the British. Big famines, life was hard even in years of normal crops. When famine came, people had to dispose of their cattle, land, and household goods to procure food. There were instances of mothers selling away their children for a few days' food. The big famine of 1837 to 38 made people desert their villages and wander in search of food. Famines were no doubt the result of drought or other calamities. The government could lessen people's misery, but it seemed that it had no will to act.